Good afternoon, everybody. I will give you a short overview on the activities in Annex 79, which deals with occupant behavior. And so I choose as a title for my presentation, Do Occupants Matter? Comfort and Occupant Behavior as Relevant Drivers for Building Energy Performance. And move on. Now, so if you look into the literature, there are a large number of studies, mostly simulation studies, showing the potential influence of occupants, occupant behavior, comfort conditions on building energy performance. So just as an example, this study was done by Hong and Lin in 2013, showing different comfort conditions and the fact of occupancy and how that relates to building energy performance. And it's very obvious also from other studies that there can be a great impact on building energy performance and also building performance in general, meaning the performance operation of HVAC systems. Interesting enough, if you look at studies a bit deeper, and this was done by Adeshe Madavi, Christiane Berger, and others in the subtask 1 of our annex. And they wanted to find out the role of occupants in the building energy performance gap. And their central finding was, and they reviewed a lot more than 100 articles for that, that the existing studies do not really provide a convincing evidence for the purported significant contribution of occupants to the energy performance gap, which doesn't mean that there is no influence, but obviously the studies didn't tell in detail. There was only a few studies where you can find actual monitored data on occupant behavior. So this is a clear message. If we want to study the role of occupants deeper, better studies have to be done with better monitoring and a more transparent procedure how to do these studies. However, we all know that there are a lot of interventions of occupants in buildings, and they obviously do influence building performance in a way. So what are reasons for occupants interventions? Occupants might be dissatisfied with building automation, meaning that they either override set points or behave differently as the automation assumes. Another reason might be that interfaces are not designed for the intended purpose or are not even equipped with the relevant functions. In a wider sense, regarding the whole building concept, planners probably do not consider occupants' needs in the building design. And the same is true for building operation. And on the other hand, for buildings where there are intended interventions in buildings like passively cooled buildings, we have these interventions which we have to be aware of and which we have to know better. So a conclusion from this would be that occupants have to be included into the overall building concept and into the control strategy to better harmonize occupants' needs and building performance. And for that, we also have to better understand occupant behavior. In Annex 66, there has already been a lot of work on occupant behavior in the context of building energy performance. And this annex provided a really sound framework for, on the one hand, experimentally studying and modeling different behavioral actions, and also a framework for implementation of occupant behavior models into simulation platforms. But we still see a large discrepancy between this available knowledge, these available models, and the actual building design and operation practice. And there are still a lot of open questions which have not been answered in Annex 66, which are, for example, the impact of so-called multiple indoor environmental parameters on human perception and the resulting behavioral reactions, meaning that most models look at single environmental parameters like thermal parameters or visual parameters, but not the interaction between the both. Then another question would be how do building controls interfaces and their underlying logic affect behavior, or how can building automation systems and other available data sources be better leveraged for improving occupant-centric building concepts? And finally, what kind of information has to be provided to designers and to building managers to better apply occupant behavior knowledge and the existing models in building practice? So for this, we started a new annex, Annex 79, about 3 years ago. And the main objectives of this annex are the following. We would like to improve the knowledge about occupants' interactions with building technologies. And there are two focuses. One is the comfort-driven actions caused by these multiple and interdependent, at least very often interdependent environmental influences, which are, as I said, not yet covered by current models. And we also focus on building technologies interfaces in terms of their suitability for taking advantage of adaptive opportunities and their effect on building energy consumption. Second objective would be the deployment of big data, meaning data mining, machine learning, artificial intelligence for the building sector. So there's a lot of knowledge and methodologies available already in different domains, and we would like to foster this for the building sector together with new technologies for data collecting with different sensors. And then more on the application side, we would like to implement occupant behavior models in building practice, which means that we work on guidelines, recommendations for standards for applying occupant behavior models and this knowledge about occupants during building design and operation. And we also will look at different case studies where we like to implement and test these new models in different phases, either in the design or operation phase, in order to get some feedback about these methods and models. We have quite a large group. We have people working in Annex 79 from 18 countries all over the world, attracting roughly 100 to 120 participants in our meetings and symposiums. And the next slides will show you some ongoing activities. So our subtask 1 is looking at these multiple environmental influences and interfaces, as these graphs kind of illustrates this, which means that they, for example, collect information on human building interaction in multi-domain studies, looking at studies where acoustic, thermal and or visual and or air quality parameters have been considered in terms of human perception. And they also look at these different interfaces people interact with the building. Then another goal is to define conditions for multi-domain IEQ standards, and most importantly, to build up a framework for multi-domain studies. So what is the experimental background and framework to study these multiple effects more in detail and come out with comparable results? Together with that, we and this subtask did a large review on existing test facilities all over the world, defining criteria which are important for these multi-domain studies. And in the next step, a round-robin test will be implemented in these in participating countries with test facilities. And as you can see, also COVID-19 is a topic in terms of multi-domain IEQ studies, where we examine home office places in terms of these comfort influences. Subtask 2 is trying to advance methodologies and tools for data-driven occupant presence and action modeling and their implementation. And there are 3 main packages. So the first focus would be what are the typical occupant profiles, and they are they will be extracted from the ASHRAE Global Occupant Behavior Database, and this is this information is mostly relevant for the building design phase. Then the second package would be how to measure occupant behavior, where the aim is a guideline on occupant data collecting and modeling, which is mostly important for the construction and commissioning phase of a building. And finally, for the operational phase, they will try to answer the question how to evaluate occupant behavior models, which means that they will provide a framework for sharing and evaluating occupant behavior models. Looking into design practice, this is the main focus of our subtask 3. So based on reviews on codes and standards involving performance-based design, they will firstly look at ways for communicating occupant related assumptions between stakeholders. So which information is available about occupants, occupant behavior in the different phases of the design process and for the different stakeholders involved in the design process. This will then go into the design process where occupants will be investigated in terms of their role in the building design workflow and to extract the occupant perspective and needs to inform building designers. This all goes then into simulation-aided design methods. So what does it mean, modeling occupant behavior in the design process? A very important topic is the fit-for-purpose occupant modeling approaches and simulation-aided occupant-centric design. This will be mirrored by findings from case studies, as I said before, where a couple of these models will be applied in different phases of the design and will be validated against design practice. And finally, we have subtask 4 looking on building operation, which is mainly occupant-centric controls. Again, based on a literature review, they are going to interview building operators to get their view on the building operation and integration of occupants in building control, and then a number of activities trying to describe occupant-centric controls to come up with a taxonomy. And finally, then integrate occupant behavior models for controls into simulation and into building automation and building management software. Also here we have case studies which are not explicitly mentioned in this graph, where these controls will be implemented and tested, and then again, findings will be drawn for future perspectives. What are the outputs of this annex so far? The annex started its work in 2019. So first of all, we did a very thorough review on research papers on the different facets of this annex. and we were allowed to put them into one special issue of Building and Environment. So I can really recommend to get this special issue, which gives a very good basis about the current knowledge in the field of occupant behavior or occupant-centric building design and operation. There's a second special issue on its way, which is focused on occupant-centric controls in the Journal of Building Performance Simulation. We did contribution to the ASHRAE handbook, and we will also work on a RIVA guidebook, the European equivalent to ASHRAE. All the findings so far can be found in research papers. We published 29 journal papers in the last 2 years. And if you're interested in these papers, you might want to go to the Annex 79 homepage, where we have a whole list of these publications, and you can also find them in our newsletters. And that's about it. Oops. Sorry, there's obviously some noise behind the slides. Sorry about that. Nevertheless, I'm open for questions, and I hand over the floor to Peter Opfeld, who will give you the Dutch perspective. And if you look at the CV of Peter, there's one thing to remark. He has been attending 10 different IEA annexes. Peter, the floor is yours.